national participation in the framework program. One of the three, in the slogan of the Research Commissioner, Commissioner Moidas, there are three O's: open science, open innovation, and open to the world. And the ambition of Horizon 2020 was that it be very open, and it is open in theory. In practice, the participation rate of international partners has actually declined compared to FP7. So why? What should be done about it in the future? This session is intended to be a very concrete discussion of the issues involved with increasing participation of third countries, that is totally, well, first countries as European Union members, second countries as associated in the European neighborhood, as it were, or EFTA, and then the third category is everybody else in the world. So how do we change that and improve the situation? To begin, what I thought would be helpful is, this is a really complex area. I mean, I've already started with three categories. You haven't even heard all the variations. I asked if Signorazzo, the Deputy Director General for Research and Innovation in the Commission, could just start us off with a little presentation about what is open to the world, why is it, and what's the issues in improving it. So, Signa, please, over to you.
Dear participants of the conference, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to attend this very important conference on the subject of discussing open to the world, how to make Horizon Europe more international. Now, to start off, let me just underline why international cooperation is increasingly important for European research institutions, universities, but also for companies. First, they need access to the world's best talents, experience, and resources. Let me give just a few figures in order to illustrate that. Today, 90% of world expenditure on research and development, 73% of scientific publications, and 70% of patent applications are outside the EU. Second, they need to take part in shaping research and innovation policy agendas and also actions in order to tackle global challenges. Global challenges like climate change, societal challenges like infectious diseases, clean energy, food security. As the name shows, these challenges are global in nature. So in order to tackle these issues and also to find solutions, we clearly need to cooperate. We need to cooperate with our international partners. And the third reason is actually economic in nature. Namely, they also need to enter global value chains and foreign markets. Also, in order to scale up startup companies. This is also an issue that has been discussed in other sessions. Namely, 90% of global economic growth in the next decade is expected also to take outside Europe. International co-invention of patents has increased significantly, and most countries have experienced significant increases in the share of foreign added value in export and also in final consumption. And finally, cooperation with international partners can be used also as an instrument of soft power in support of our external policies, also in support of our trade policy, in cases there is no access to the markets outside. So these are all good reasons why all of you should, and all of us should engage in international cooperation. However, engaging with international partners is not happening naturally. Why? Because first, there are many competing priorities. Then international cooperation is generally more costly, and its management is also more complex, as also is what's pointed out at the beginning of this session. Even if many challenges are global, as I mentioned, the policies and regulations are either national or regional, and even more so, they may often prevent a global level playing field. This is why we have in place a strategy for the EU international cooperation in research and innovation. And that's why Open to the World is really one of the priorities. Let me just first mention also what are the main objectives of this cross-cutting strategy. These are first to strengthen EU's research and innovation excellence and attractiveness to the world, then also to increase its economic industrial competitiveness, to tackle global challenges together, as said, and support EU's external policies. And this has been the strategy since the beginning of the current framework program, which is Horizon 2020. However, as said, results are mixed. Now, first, let me start with the good news and give you some very concrete examples. Namely, if we take program-to-program cooperation, then Horizon 2020 is already providing substantial contributions to initiatives like the one on poverty-related infection diseases in sub-Saharan Africa. And we also have a speaker on our panel, Michael Makanga, just to present that. So, and the size of this initiative is 683 million euros. Then let me also mention initiative on water and food challenges in the Mediterranean, PRIMA program, also in the size of 220 million euros, as well as 150 to 200 million per year to a number of multilateral initiatives in the areas of health, food, energy, and also the environment. Now for individual researcher-to-researcher cooperation and mobility, namely Marie Curie actions, these also remain very internationally oriented, and implementing arrangements with 11 third countries have already resulted in hundreds of third country researchers joining ERC principal investigator teams in Europe. Now, when it comes to organization cooperation, however, we have seen a slight fall, but still a fall, from 4.3% to 2.5% in direct third country participation in grant agreements. There are various reasons to that. Just let me mention a few of those. First, little use of international cooperation specific structures or instruments. Then the fact that the so-called BRIC plus M countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Mexico, are no longer automatically eligible for funding. Then that the program is now coming closer to the market. That's why also it would be more difficult for third country participants to engage, and then also mentioning socio-political developments in the EU neighborhood, which also has hampered the use of the program. What has been done already? We have already reacted and launched more than 30 international cooperation flagship initiatives. Now under the 2018 to 2020 work program, and the size of these flagships together is more than 1 billion euros. So really a sizable already contribution. Let me recall a few concrete examples. For instance, initiatives with Japan and Korea on 5G communication networks, then cloud and Internet of Things. With China on food, agriculture and biotechnology, with Canada on human data storage, and with Africa on food security. And now finally, let's come to the plans for the future. As it has been identified on the impact assessment, which we run in preparation for Framework Programme 9, Horizon Europe, this showed the need to further strengthening international cooperation. So what will Horizon Europe do in order to put even more focus on that? Horizon Europe will intensify its openness to the world while safeguarding union interest. First, it will continue the general opening for international participation and targeted international cooperation actions. The future program will pave the way for setting up large-scale international cooperation flagship initiatives, which will be of mutual benefit, then joint calls, and finally partnerships with international partners. These will be identified on thematic and geographical strategic intelligence, taking into account S&T capabilities, market opportunities, and also contribution to international commitments like Sdgs. During the strategic programming phase, which will be ahead of us, now after the Commission proposal will be published in 2 days' time. And then as part of this strategic programming, then we will define international cooperation actions. In doing that, we shall really be strategic, engaging with our international partners, namely in order to solve the priority challenges, which will be defined by the program. What I'd also like to mention is that these initiatives and actions should be complementary and also mutually reinforcing with other union programs. Because what is also the underlying feature of Horizon Europe is better synergies with other programs, including what we are doing with our external instrument when it comes to third countries. So these will seek alignment and also coherence with parallel strands under the external instrument. And this will all be done as part of the strategic programming. What I'd also like to highlight, as said, that Horizon Europe should also make explicit a number of safeguards that should ensure also the EU interest in all of that. Now, regarding the future association policy, the program will extend openness to association of third countries, particularly those with good capacity and STI, on rules-based open market economy, democracy and socio-economic well-being, also taking into account the objective of driving economic growth in the EU through innovation. Now, just to sum up, openness to the world remains a strategic priority. It reinforces research and innovation through excellence, strengthens competitiveness, helps to solve global challenges, and Horizon Europe will intensify its world while safeguarding the union interests. Thanks a lot for this opportunity to give you this background, and looking forward to a very lively and interesting discussion as part of the panel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Stay there. Let's, before we bring the panel up, any immediate factual questions? Okay, what we're trying to do is here get some facts out on the table that we can all agree on. Questions of fact. Well, I can certainly, yes, please. You are? Oh, and, sorry, we have a microphone so that the web audience can hear.
Hello, I'm Patrick Crahan from CKA. My question is, do you have an idea of a earmarking budget for international cooperation or for specific regions?
No, this will not happen because the Horizon Europe will be cross-cutting through the sectors and also through different areas. That's the underlying feature, and that's why there won't be any earmark-specific budget for international cooperation either.
But you said in Horizon 2020, in the flagships, that the 30 flagships, there was, I think you said about $1 billion was being gathered together. Well, earmarked or not, is there some kind of number like that that you're thinking of as a target for Horizon Europe?
Now, what is different in the work program, because work program is really more specific, and in these flagships, really what was the rationale behind them was now to see how we could really enlarge international cooperation while focusing on very specific flagship areas. And certainly as part of the strategic programming, there will be the figures for different activities, but there is no general earmarking for international cooperation in the Horizon Europe proposal as such.
Okay. All right, another question? Yes, in the back.
Andrea Bos from Nether. I have a question about association that you say will be extended to other countries. Could you possibly say something about whether that association will be only for a couple of pillars or whether full association will be possible, particularly in the light of Theresa May calling for full association to Horizon Europe?
Well, on the association, certainly the countries which will be associated to the programs are those which are already associated, like acceding countries, candidate countries, potential candidates, then countries covered by European neighbourhood policy, and then the third countries. And for the third countries, there will be the criteria that I mentioned, that they have a good capacity in science, technology, innovation, commitment to rules-based open markets, active promotion of policies to improve economic, social well-being. So these will be the underlying criteria, and these will be also the criteria then for the possibility for the full association. In addition to that, certainly there are the different kinds of cooperation models, and I think that the panel will give already some concrete examples about those. How these
well,
have been
I think what she might be referring to is that we saw also, by the way, as you know, I don't think in my 20 years in Brussels I've ever seen so many documents flying around, and which is great as a journalist. I'm not complaining, but
you mean leaked documents?
flying around. But you know, one of these early documents, which I understand is now out of date, and was indeed going to limit this to pillars 1 and 2. But so that's not going to happen?
Well, you'll still have to wait for 2 days in order to see what will be in the final proposal.
Now, those were the rules of engagement when you agreed to come. Yeah. Yes, question there. Hold on.
Thank you. I'm Craig Nicholson from Research Europe. Could I just ask you to clarify what you just said, please, in response to the previous question? Because it seemed to me as though you said no countries that are not currently associated will associate in the future, which seems to rule out UK association.
No, I said that the countries and then I mentioned who have been already associated will be associated in the future. And then I mentioned all the countries, all the different groups of countries.
So the implication being there could be other countries that become associated?
Yes. Yeah. So it will be extended to other third countries, also which are not associated countries so far. So that will be the possibility also for those to become associated, in addition to those which are already associated.
And that was the recommendation of the Lamy group also?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Another question? Yeah. Well, one question which we will get into in the course of this discussion, but as I said, this whole field is incredibly complicated, and as I've been looking into it and myself and trying to understand it better, it's become clear that whatever you say on the big policy intentions and program planning, the issues actually get incredibly fine-grained. They are about the model grant agreement and about the specifics of the legal provisions, and even if you have an agreement up at this level of government, the fact is that down there where the universities and others are looking at it, there's a problem. So is there any intention to change those legal procedures and agreements?
Well, simplification has been the objective for Horizon 2020, and a lot has been already done. For instance, now everything is over the net. There are no paper submissions and so on and so forth. Also, what Horizon 2020 aims to do is to continue with simplification of procedures, simplifications for those who apply for the grants. On the other hand, what we need to keep in mind that the Commission is the guardian of EU treaties. So all those should be based on the legal base of the EU. So this is on the other hand which we need to keep in mind. However, as said, there will be continued process to simplify the procedures what can be simplified. And we will follow with that.
Okay. Any last question from anyone before we begin? Yes, right there. Go ahead.
Good morning, Doris Alexander, Trinity College, Dublin. I think what you were perhaps alluding to, Richard, in your previous question was whether or not under a foreseen associated process you could have countries that could perhaps not have to sign up to the grant agreement. We've seen issues around the US having difficulties doing that, but wanting to participate in parts of the programme, or whether it's foreseen that all associated countries, whether they exist at the moment or whether you're extending out, would then actually have to sign up to the model grant agreement.
As said, there are the different models how to do that. So this is not the only possibility. I didn't go into all these legal details, but I could. But like for the US, there are also the other possibilities. So these possibilities will also be possible for other third countries. So this is not only the model agreements, but they could also participate. Now, let me just find those. The facts say they could participate in the program as full participant partner with all the same rights and obligations. A third country partner signs the grant agreement, so this is the first option. Then they could cooperate as international partner, like third party to one partner, who is a full partner. So in this case, the third country partner does not sign the grant agreement. And the third possibility is other third party as subcontractor to the third country partner that does not sign the grant agreement. So these three possibilities will
But they
will
exist
still be
already,
there.
these
Yes,
possibilities.
yes,
So
yes.
you're not planning to change the...
No, they will continue. They will continue.
Okay, all right. Okay, Senior, thank you very much. Please have a seat here and join in the discussion on what follows. But what I had asked, as you can see, this is a formidable panel, and we haven't even filled it yet. It's kind of like this is applicants for one grant, and it's the success rate is here of Horizon 2020. What I asked the people who are joining us here is to make one suggestion on how to increase international cooperation. And I've kind of grouped them a little bit, okay? But just so you have an idea where we're going, the first grouping is how to do multilateral, huge, humongous, co-funding, co-coordinated programs together. The second topic is how to do third country, like the US that was referred to earlier. And the final topic is associated country. And I have to give it away a little. I think people are going to be exceedingly cautious when we come to that one. But here we go. May I have the panel please come up? Find a way to fit yourself in there. Incredibly, this is the amount of room they've given us. What I suggest is so that you are all mic'd, yes? Yes. Yeah, very good. Okay. Oh, good. Okay, actually, why don't we take one of the chairs out, and then we can, yeah, and then Andy won't fall off. Yeah, and move a little bit this way. Thank you. Orchestration going on as we speak. So first, let's hit that first topic. These incredibly large, multilateral, harmonious programs, and how can they work better? And I asked Michael Makanga to just start us off. Michael is the CEO of European and Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership, which is one of those very large initiatives. And Michael, how could that or other multilateral programs work better? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. As stated, I'm representing the European and Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership, which is a public-public partnership that is bringing together institutions that are mandated by governments from Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa to fund clinical research, capacity development, and international cooperation. And this is to develop interventions in the fight against poverty-related diseases. And this includes the emerging and re-emerging ones. And as I speak, I have to say that this is the first initiative of the European Union that went into the space of international cooperation that was first supported from the Framework Program 6 and has gone on to Horizon 2020, to be part of Horizon 2020. And before talking about the improvements, I have to compliment this because under this program, there are 3 areas that have been addressed, and that is cooperation within the European research area, cooperation with industrialized countries and emerging economies, and cooperation with developing countries. And this is a partnership that is now involving equal participation of European member states and African member states in defining priorities and supporting the development of these interventions. Having said this, we can do better. As we stand, we are collaborating with over 100 institutions in Africa and over 200 institutions in Sub-Saharan Africa. But with government commitment from 14 European member states and government commitment from 17 African member states with co-funding from the European Union.
31 countries. Okay.
So in terms of activities, we have activities in 35 African countries and activities in 16 European countries. Now, doing what we do, we can do a lot better. And this is where I'm calling upon looking at EU positioning itself in Horizon Europe as an international lead player in the field of research and development. There has to be a leap in terms of increase in the support that goes into this space. Much of what can be done leverages on collaboration. The work we do, partnership is at the heart of it. And this is where we have to consider where we are coming from, where we are now, and where we are going. Looking at where we are coming from, Europe has made significant investment in research and development, in developing medical interventions. Many of these have been de-risked and are in late-stage development. Infrastructure development there's been significant investment in this area, and large networks have been established. If we are going to move ahead and Europe is going to position itself, it is important that this initial investment is not put to waste. And that will call upon substantial investment in international collaboration. If I may give specific examples, in international collaboration, when you come to research and development, when products are moved further in late development, there is more interest that comes from the private sector. There is more interest that comes from both public and private. But when you're collaborating with the private sector, there is an element of speed and there is an element of efficiency. We have to make sure that there is that adjustment in our funding to accommodate that. When we talk about late-stage development and the infrastructures that have been built, the countries we are collaborating with to put investment, matching investment, will require flexibility on the way that we support this late-stage development and sustaining the capacity that is in place.
So flexibility on what?
Flexibility in funding. And much of our funding is based on competition that is through calls for proposals. Not all activities can be achieved with calls for proposal when you're working with partners in product development, in late-stage development, when you're working with governments. There has to be different modalities of funding. We can have the space for calls for proposals, but we can also have a space for looking at what is successful, what is promising and in the late stage, where others have interest to co-fund, and we partner with them to take this forward, and leave room for competition, but at another level, not through calls for proposals. This can be done, but with limited flexibility.
So, for instance, what are you talking about? Like if you want to, if there's a promising clinical target that you're trying to get into phase 2 or something like that?
Well, that may be done, but take an example when you have a late-stage product that is in phase 3, and this is part of a program that also has industry partners, and they want to move this forward, requiring quick decision-making. We have some constraints in terms of the timing on when we can make decisions on certain things.
These constraints are in Brussels.
And
that's a question, not an assertion.
well, part of this is a restriction that may come and be linked, that is linked to the Horizon 2020 rules, but that can be simplified to make it easy. When we talk about other approaches that have worked, for example, I have to give credit that with the recent incidence of emerging infections of epidemic potential, we've been able to move faster because the Commission has made some adjustments for us to have some funding that is set aside for epidemic responsiveness. So in this case, this is something that has been able to happen because of a decision that was made.
Okay.
Similar nest eggs needs to be created that can enable fast movement, that can enable this kind of agility for us to work with partners in product development.
If I can summarize in one sentence, faster, more flexible rules and procedures in the program for later stage development after the initial grant.
That's correct.
But why not just connect it to like the EIC, the European Innovation Council? Could there be would that kind of thing work, that you just push these projects off into other parts of the Commission of Horizon Europe that do have more flexibility?
What happens is when you establish partnerships with global partnerships, it is important to maintain these partnerships because we've won confidence with partners, and it is good to have this kind of continuity. And in this, what needs to be done is what needs to be looked at 3 levels. On the side of the research community that we work with is to have, of course, that clarity and certainty that there will be provision to advance these things forward, working with the private sector, ensuring that we will have that agility to cope up with the speed and efficiency to be able to deliver with them. And also when working with the governments to make sure that we have that commitment to address the local priorities and also paying special attention to sustainability of what is built and having this long-term engagement. And this is where we need to continue what we've started.
Okay, all right, okay. Any, so that issue of flexibility, particularly in later stage, any immediate comment on this that rings a bell with you? No? You don't have to. We're going to group these together. So, okay. But so let's. Yes, please go ahead. Microphone on way. I should have said, by the way, there is a hashtag for this.
Thank you.
It's Innovative EU. But go ahead.
Patrick Crahan. On the issue of flexibility, it's understandable that in the framework program there's a big emphasis on scientific excellence. But from an innovation point of view, it isn't always excellence that is, the major criterion. There is an interest in the market, and to some extent, things have to be adapted to the market, or market conditions have to be developed. And so, in working with projects in North Africa, we've often seen a situation where consortia have failed. Mainly on criteria of excellence. They haven't been, considered to be world-class, even though there might have been a commercial and a business interest in developing the networks or the activities. So I'm wondering, is it possible to see some flexibility on this, or a differentiation of criteria depending on the economic goal of the science that's being done?
Well, actually, I'm going to, Senia, do you want to respond on that one? Here, keep the mic here. You can or not, as you like. It's as we, perhaps later, then we do it. Okay, so we take that. And Michael, did you want to have an answer on that, or?
Well, just to mention that at the moment, the evaluation is done based on 3 areas: scientific excellence, potential impact, and efficiency in terms of implementation of the projects. And in this case, this is where collaboration is key. Because irrespective of where the work is done, we want it to be done excellently and up to international standards. And if the collaboration can allow for that kind of partnership, bringing and leveraging the best brains and talent from different areas to enrich the consortia that implement the work, you find that this can be very successful.
Okay, all right, let's stop here. Diego, may I turn to you next? Diego Fernandez Prieto, he's the head of research and development of the Directorate of Earth Observation Programs at the European Space Agency. So you know a thing or two about multilateral working. What's your suggestion?
Yeah, I was really curious about what Razzo said before about the flagship initiatives, because my point is actually associated to the need these days to be a little bit more ambitious in the way Europe faces international partnerships in terms of programs. I think the global problems that we have today, I'm dealing with Earth observation, so I'm dealing with issues like climate change, I'm dealing with issues with Earth system science. So addressing all that need to put in place a lot of different capabilities in terms of different infrastructures, in situ networks, satellites, etc. And a single country, and in this case a single continent, cannot face all that. So the suggestion that I would like to make is to be a little bit more ambitious in the way we could blend funding between, for instance, Horizon 2020 and third-party large programs like NSF in the state. I think an interesting framework for that, for instance, is the Galway Transatlantic Alliance.
Remind people of what that is.
It's a partnership between Europe, Canada, and the States to put in place or coordinate better activities around the Atlantic, covering also the Arctic. So in this type of frameworks, putting in place practical mechanisms to allow scientists from Europe working closely with scientists from the States and putting together different capacities to face or to tackle common challenges together could be a very nice endeavor for the coming future.
So how would you do this?
I think it's a question of political will, and it's a question also of trying to find mechanisms also to better coordinate maybe bottom-up approaches that may come from the two sides of the Atlantic.
Well, one of the problems that when I was looking at the U.S.-EU collaboration is that speaking to the National Science Foundation and to the State Department and others, they say that although they say that it's much easier to have bilateral deals between them and, say, the British or the German or the French government
Correct.
than it is to do it with the EU. So is that just like pushing, trying to do more through the EU? Is that basically a waste of time? Should we just try to be doing things bilaterally then if you have an international thing? What's the advantage of trying to do it through the EU?
The main advantage is that in that case you can capitalize on the full European capacity in practical terms. So the interlocutor for the States in that case will not be France, will not be Germany, or will not be that particular scientific group or that particular national institution, but will be the full EU capacity. And the EU capacity is huge. That means I always advocate for this story of European leadership in an international context. So never underestimate the capacity that Europe has as a continent. Countries can do a lot, and probably bilateral agreements are easy to implement. But putting in place the full capacity, for instance, of the States, etc., or with Canada, etc., with the full capacity provided by all member states of the Union, the potential is huge.
Okay, but the ESA is not a European Union institution. It's European. So why do you even need to do it through the EU at all? I mean, ESA could perfectly well organize these
For instance,
itself.
in the case of the European Space Agency, if I can give you my own perspective, the challenges that we are facing cannot be only faced with space. You need other things in place. You need to put in place models. You need in place in situ networks. You need to bring other capacities that are beyond space. So addressing those challenges, the space component is just a single piece of the cake. It's just one element of the full equation. So you need additional elements, and this is where I believe the EU can contribute, because they have the possibility to have interdisciplinary research, bringing together different elements, all the elements that are needed in order to solve a particular problem.
How do the rest of you feel about this? Should international multilateral things go through the EU? Marlene Maillard from the Swiss mission, please. Yes.
That should be part of my proposal as well, because as Switzerland has been participating already, has a long tradition in EU research program. We are associated to Euratom since 1979, so in the framework program since 1987. And we are contributing largely as well to support development of multilateral initiative then at national level. And last year we did also a large consultation of our stakeholders to prepare the interim evaluation and FP9 as well. And in that terms, we realized as well that it's many initiatives that are developed within the research funders that go actually in the same direction to find a broader multilateral approach. And one of the things that I wanted to mention today as a proposal is also to support from the Commission side the fact that those initiatives are actually trying to fill in some missing parts of the framework program. And here I want to speak especially about the lead agency procedure. So that's actually a test that Switzerland, Germany, and Austria started like 10 years ago in order to simplify the evaluation and submission process in order to have only one single evaluation institution who would do the evaluation, and then that it would be accepted by the partners. That you could have like a multilateral project being funded under one single evaluation. And now the idea also developed...
So wait, Marilyn, just so I understand, so with this lead agency thing, who does the evaluation? Is it the lead agency, or does everybody do it together?
No, that would be only the lead agency doing it.
So Switzerland will allow the DFG to decide?
Exactly. So
Wow.
that's a deal, an agreement that exists.
With Swiss money that let this happen?
Then at the end, it's every research funding organization that pays for their own researchers. So question of money is there not under discussion, but at least you need to accept the evaluation procedure of the other evaluation organization. So the Swiss National Science Foundation then accepted that DFG and FFV then had like also an agreement to have like those type of cooperation. And then the idea was like, at the time it was said like where the most money is asked for, like that will be that lead agency that will do the evaluation. Now on the multilateral aspect that want to be developed would be actually to say we let the choice to the researcher to decide where they want to apply and to justify it, why they want to apply in Switzerland or in Germany or in Austria or somewhere else in the States. So the idea is really now to start to develop this framework at a broader level on the EU side. So thanks to Science Europe working group, there like the idea is to have a concept by the end of the year, and then to open it as well more largely to international collaboration.
So this is something that Science Europe is actually working on, a plan, a proposal of this.
And the Swiss National Science Foundation has the lead right now on.
Okay, but how would that, I don't understand, how would that work within the Horizon Europe context?
So
could it be a lead agency?
That could be like a proposal to try to see like how the model could be extended or supported by FP9. So I think some other model worked also really well, like the Eureka model or the different Article 185 that has been funded there.
For those who don't have it memorized, Article 185 says what?
So actually, like for example, we have like the Eurostar project that is a match between match funding between Horizon 2020 and national funding, trying to put together like international cooperation for the domain of innovation. And there in Eurostar 2, we had the participation of Canada, South Africa, and Republic of Korea. And that gives you like enough flexibility to add co-funding from the Commission on top of the national funding that would be pulled together in order to reach a certain goal. So,
but legally, is it even possible for the Commission to let somebody else decide, another country decide how to spend the money?
That's the part of like where the Commission needs to put the rules and on what they want to contribute, either by supporting the management or by doing a top-up in the grants. So I think there you have like different models to be developed. So
the proposal is to take this lead agency idea and to see if it can be Expanded, improved?
Or like if we need like also like a secretariat or like a structure that should be reinforced or
so whoever is the champion for this is going to rush forward with
at
it.
least like make aware that such initiatives are existing and perhaps see like if further collaboration could be developed in that
Do you think that one of these, based on the examples you gave, a lead agency could also be a non-EU member? Is that right?
Sure.
So it could be Britain, for instance.
Yeah, it can be US, it can be Australia, it can be any type of country, as long as you recognize the evaluation structure existing in the organization, who is then partner of the lead agency structure.
Right. Okay. Reactions to this idea? Oh, you're all being very diplomatic here. Come on. No argument about it? Ronald, you're bursting.
Am I?
Yeah.
Thank you, Rich, for...
Well, wait, hold on. Before you go on, honestly, this is I hadn't heard this one before. Maybe that's just my ignorance. But any reaction to this yourselves? Is this a way to do international collaboration? Okay, all right. Well, we're all trying to assess how this works. Just one last question on the lead agency thing. So, from your experience so far, did it require, how does it work for a Swiss researcher to sign a contract with the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, for instance? Does that work?
Yeah, I think like the 10-year experience...
No, excuse me, I jumped to a conclusion. Is the contract with the DFG or is the contract with the Swiss?
So the Swiss researcher will have a contract with the Swiss funding organization.
Okay.
And the same for the German one, that will have like a contract with their organization, because at the end the fundings come nationally.
Yeah.
So it's also some other instrument existing, for example, in Switzerland, where we allow 20% of the total budget being spent somewhere else.
Right, but the evaluation is in that case Germany then.
So no, like no, the 20%, if Switzerland allows to pay another researcher, the evaluation is made by Switzerland for a Swiss project, but where it has been proven that the necessity of having this 20% extra for like an international partner to be part of it, that will be paid by Switzerland too. So the idea is really to keep the evaluation, but to bring in expertise and the right partner where needed, and to pay for it.
Okay, all right, that's very interesting. Anyway, so Ronald, if I can turn to you now. It's Ronald de Bruin, who's the director of the Cost Association. What is your suggestion?
Well, let me be very pragmatic, let's say, in the approach. First of all, I don't have an overall, let's say, answer to the question that you asked in the beginning of the conversation. There's no silver bullet, to my opinion. I think we have to be very careful with what we're trying to achieve in what area and why. What I can tell, at least from the experience of cost, is indeed our grant holders have to be coming from members. So that is already... I think an interesting observation from my side towards you, that this is for me a novelty, so that is quite interesting to see this taking further shape. But COST is an intergovernmental framework. We have 37 countries as a member. That includes all the EU members, plus another couple of members, including Turkey, for example, but also Montenegro is a member, and so forth. These members, together with one cooperating member, that's Israel, who's also associated with the framework program, comprise the governance, let's say, structure of COST. We do have, in a similar way as the EU does, a policy for our neighbor countries, so near neighboring countries from COST, because of our geographical footprint that is slightly larger than the EU. Let's say our perimeter is also a little bit larger. These near neighbor countries are then officially acknowledged as such, and the benefit for participants in those countries is that the COST networks that we finance get a top-up. So that's very important. It runs quite successfully in the sense that we have very recently approved a request for membership from Albania last April. Also Kosovo, under the United Nations Security Council resolution, has been acknowledged as a near neighbor country. I think it is very important also from a political point of view, and this will be, I think, also a message to the Commission, that we have covered the entire Western Balkans. And in the perspective of the Western Balkan initiative of the European Commission, where science, or more precise terms, science diplomacy, is always a door opener for collaboration. We do have a drive to expand the membership further. We know there's a big appetite from countries like Moldova. The criterion to join, by the way, cost is that you have to, of course, abide with the normal principles of democracy and human rights and so forth. There is another criterion that says that you have to be associated with at least 2 framework programs, and Moldova would already qualify in that sense. But there is a third criterion, and if you want to become a member of the governance structure, you have to have a minimum, let's say, amount of participants from your country in cost, and there's a threshold of 5%. Now, Moldova is doing its very best to achieve that, and I'm quite optimistic. But there also are a couple of other countries knocking on our door. Very recently, our president, Siert Kloeting, also here in the audience, has visited Georgia as part of the Eastern Partnership. Of course, and as soon as Georgia enters into FP9 or Horizon Europe, they have fulfilled the criterion of being associated in 2 consecutive framework programs, so they can become a member as well. But having said that, we have a third category, and that is the international partner countries. So far, we have no country, let's say, in that category. But we do have countries like South Africa knocking on our door. As a matter of fact, this week I have a meeting with representatives of the South African government. And our approach...
So if the suggestion then, then are you saying that the cost model should be expanded then?
Well, there is just hear me out for another couple of sentences, because there is the governance level in terms of our membership that comes with benefits. People can participate in cost actions and also take an active role in the management committee, in the leadership of those actions. However, cost is truly open to the entire world. Any participant from wherever, even if that participant has never been involved in a proposal, can join. The only difference is that if you are from an international partner country, that you have to bear your own expenses. But we do have, let's say, participants from Korea, from Russia, from Brazil, UK, in the future. Talking about, let's say, because this is also an element that came on the table this morning, potential, full Brexit or not. The UK is a member of COST. The UK has very well expressed its intention to remain a member of COST. Depending on how the UK will be associated or not with the framework program, their participants will remain eligible for reimbursement or not. That remains to be seen. But we cannot imagine, let's say, research collaboration without an excellent community as in the UK. So, all in all, international members, anyone who is not even in the cost structure, is accepted on the basis of mutual benefit. So, membership as such is your ticket in a priori, but we are truly open, and the assessment of mutual benefit is made on the level of the action. So it's very practical in that sense to implement.
So is the suggestion then that Horizon Europe should be flexible, variable geometry on everything it does? I mean, are you saying that the cost kind of model can apply through the whole framework program?
Well, to be more particular, we get our funding from the Commission through a grant agreement.
Yeah.
right? So we are completely bound to the financial rules. But we cascade, let's say, that funding on the basis of our own rules, our own intergovernmental rules, to third parties. That is technically speaking what happens. So as long as, let's say, the Horizon framework gives the platform, the vehicle in terms of also associations with other parts of the world, we can mirror that by making people eligible for extra funding or not. So that makes it for us a very easy, let's say, thing to implement.
Okay. At this point, Signe, this was the multilateral proposals. Do you want to comment anything on any of this at the moment? Yes, go ahead. Microphone.
I can come over.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. So, multilateral.
Now, we've heard a lot of different types of partnerships, including international partners, international organizations, countries, but also then the business entities. Now, overall, let me just say, to put one general remark. Over the years, we've seen that different kinds of partnerships have really made a very complicated landscape. This is, well, you mentioned that there are the complicated rules, but this is one additional complication. Because it's then for the final beneficiaries, it's not so easy to find their way. It's a real labyrinth then to find a way, what is the most appropriate one for me. This has been the reason why now with this proposal, with Horizon Europe proposal, one of the objectives is also to simplify the overall landscape of partnerships, whether with foreign participants or EU participants as a whole. And this is also something, the very clear advice that we received from member states by the Council, to put, then to simplify, and then to also have a very clear criteria in order to choose what will be the most appropriate form of partnerships. And these criteria, which you will also find in the proposal, will be whether there will be union added value, then transparency, openness, impact. Also, several speakers spoke about the impact, well, bringing together then different countries, say from Africa, in order to really then cope with the challenge of infectious diseases. You need then the different countries as partners. So impact, but also leverage effect, and finally long-term financial commitment of all partners, which is also important there. If you have international partners, then also long-term commitment from them, but also flexibility. This was also underlined. For instance, what we've seen really in case of the Ebola spread in Africa, then you needed the flexibility then to have the more flexible rules in order to cope with that. So this is also clearly one of these issues that we tackle, but then also coherence, complementarity with union initiatives. Now, as a result, there will be overall 3 types of partnerships. Co-programmed, meaning that then different partners will put together their funding and then they also run it together. So it's co-programmed. Then co-funded, which is based on single flexible co-program, co-fund actions. So they co-fund, but then they can run them separately, but with the same objective. And finally, then institutionalize partnerships, which were mentioned as Article 185, 187, meaning that they are either public-public, public-private partnerships, but only in those areas tackling those objectives which won't be met otherwise, because they are the most complicated structure. So then you need a clear reason behind it, in order to go there. But in reality, already today, then nearly half of co-funded actions already involve third country, either as full partners or then 2/3 include activities which are dedicated to establishing partnerships with third countries. So this is already a reality, so it's working. But in order to first to simplify the landscape and have also clearer criteria when to go to which type of funding. So that's why what we foresee also in Horizon Europe, in order to simplify, to make it more flexible for the funding, but also for the partners to participate there.
Okay.
So these are the
Cynthia, just before you go, but one thing that occurred as I was listening to you speaking, to all of you speaking, it was suddenly dawning on me that could we end up with a situation 5 years from now? Basically, we've got a whole bunch of totally different geometries with the US doing something weird with Canada and China and Germany, but not the rest of the EU. And we have Britain doing something with South Africa and in India, but not the EU. And basically, is there a risk that the EU ends up having a diminished role in international cooperation?
No, I'm not afraid of that because as well, first, really what we need to see is where there is the EU value added, and clearly putting the EU together as well. I think there was a very clear example by the Space Agency that in order to have an impact, and I'd like to underline the word impact, really it makes sense to have then EU as a whole with all the potential of the EU and member states together in order to meet the challenges that we have ahead of us. So this is the first point. And the second point is really because the objective is not to simplify so that even if there would be these three possibilities, but it's clearer so then people would know what type of partnerships they go for. And then they also know what type of rules they have to apply in this case.
All right. Well, thank you. Let's go to the third country situation here. Alex, I'm going to call on you first. Alex Cook, counselor at the Australian Embassy here. Please, Alex, what's your suggestion on third country?
Okay, thanks, Rich. Australia has the longest standing industrial treaty with the EU from 1994, which I think points to a very strong degree of relationship between the two economies, and I think we might be geographically the furthest away from them as well. And it's based around that, I guess, those two angles that our suggestion comes. So we currently have 160 collaborations in which Australia is a partner on Horizon 2020. Most of those are done at institution to institution level with very minimal government involvement. We did a consultation process with our universities and research organisations in the context of the multi-annual financial framework and asked them what are the impediments that they see in terms of building on that collaboration. We're the fourth or fifth highest collaborating partner as a third country with the EU, so we're already quite high. So what is that extra ingredient that we need to facilitate greater improvement? The resounding views that we got were the lack of the ability for small amounts of funding to consistently flow to third countries such as Australia.
Small amounts of funding.
Small amounts of grant funding. So even minimal amounts just to support travel and participation in grant activities, which would often be the biggest impediment for researchers in Australia who have to travel such a long distance.
They can't just include that in the Horizon 2020?
The way the rules are structured is, the main issue is it's not consistent across the programs. And so I'm also, for one of my other roles, as the national contact point for Australia, and the single biggest question I get from prospective applicants from Australia is, I don't understand the rules about how to be classified as an essential participant in a program. If you are classified as essential in a Horizon 2020 activity, there is a loophole, as effectively it's a loophole, and it's not consistent that allows funding to flow. The way to be classified as essential is based on what the assessors say. So there's some degree of magic about how the assessor makes that judgment.
It's not clear enough as to...
It's not clear enough. It's inconsistent, and it's not consistently applied across the activities. We think that the idea of being essential is somewhat subjective, and that maybe a different criteria, excellence or impact or some other thing that is a bit more objective and consistently applied across the program would mitigate against that. And that would then give our researchers a lot more certainty around when they can and can't apply for particular activities. So that's broadly speaking the...
Okay, so you're advocating some more Qantas flights. I'm joking.
No, well, it's amazing. We have one grant program that is heavily oversubscribed in Australia, which is the price of an airfare for a young researcher or an SME to go and collaborate internationally with a researcher or SME internationally, because it's the single biggest impediment is when you're young and starting up your idea. How do you facilitate that collaboration when you're 24 hours flight from
and then
a major
actually, you had
market?
two suggestions. The other one was this issue of being more clear about what it is to be essential. And I presume you also mean loosening up a bit on.
That's right, yeah. And I mean, we note that the research infrastructure elements of the current framework program are a lot looser, actually, in terms of funding being able to flow between third countries based on reciprocity. And perhaps coincidentally, that's one of the highest areas of collaboration that Australia has with the framework program.
Okay,
So
all right. That's two very clear points. Michael, can I come to you again on the third country side? Michael Askew, International Senior Contract Administrator at MIT from the other Cambridge. So go ahead.
Yeah, the other Cambridge. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. And I think it's important to start by saying that MIT researchers really want to do collaborative research with their European counterparts, and do, in fact, in various agreements, large and small, various instruments. I can give you a non-European example, which is the Israel's Bilateral Science Foundation and the U.S. National Science Foundation issue joint calls where when funded, the U.S. researchers abide by the terms of the American agency, and the Israelis abide by the terms of theirs. So there are certainly alternative mechanisms, as my colleagues here have described.
And do these two, do they assess the applications together?
They do. It's intended to be collaborative research. So there are different vehicles, and I wanted to start by opening with that before I dive into the very specific issue that we've run into with Horizon 2020 and before that FP7. Our researchers will frequently, periodically to frequently, come to our sponsored program office expressing an interest in participating in a Horizon 2020 call where U.S. participation is a possibility. And as is our role, we summarize for the researchers what are 6 key differences between U.S. regs and the Horizon 2020 regs from the annotated model grant agreement. And at that point, that usually discourages the researcher from pursuing the proposal further. So my one specific example, or one specific suggestion, is for the European Commission to address these 6 key terms in Horizon Europe that in my opinion, would enable not just MIT participation, but other U.S. and
give me a
possibly
few
international
examples.
participants.
What do you mean?
Well, I'll start with one. So 46.2 of the model grant agreement says that the beneficiary, which is a grantee, is responsible for any damage. And the annotated model grant agreement uses an example, I quote, "At a meeting on commission premises, a beneficiary smokes and causes a fire." So for MIT, that's alarming.
Oh my God, really? I didn't see, okay, go ahead.
It's alarming, pardon the pun, because for us, we're used to viewing damages as being things that are reasonably foreseeable and directly related to the performance of the project. When it's extended to what an individual might do on the side, there's not just the facetious jokes that we could make about secondhand smoke, or what the Surgeon General might warn, downstream, what could the damages be, potentially quite broad. But in a practical sense, bringing it back to the actual research we do, damages also encompasses inadvertent infringement of intellectual property, for example. And for MIT and educational institutions in the US, that's just not something that we can agree to be responsible for. The purpose of what MIT does is to be educating our students. We might have a professor who's working on a grant who's simultaneously teaching a class on the subject, talking about the problems that they're encountering. All of these students might then have an idea for how they're going to solve this problem. You might have, just within MIT, people infringing on intellectual property. So
Okay, give me one other example.
One other example, I'll make it about money. The indirect cost
By the way,
rate-
I should say we will be publishing a report on this, so Michael will get all 6 of your points.
I thank you for stopping me from putting your audience to sleep with all 6. The Horizon 2020 grant agreement caps indirect cost recovery at 25%, excluding a couple of things, but generally call it 25%. For a U.S. institution, we negotiate with the U.S. government. For MIT, it's on an annual basis, what our indirect cost rate is for recovery. And the terms of that agreement are that we have to charge that rate, which for MIT is currently 59%, on all of our sponsored, organized research projects.
I see some of the university people from Europe saying 59%?
It's our rate, I would say our rate is comparable, if not at the moment lower than our other American colleagues. And one of the reasons is that as a private institution, we don't have a base budget that supports our institutional cost. Our indirect cost is the cost of having facilities and having administration. And things that we can do to have a lean administration, fewer audits, less administrative oversight of particular grants, all go towards having a lower rate. But it is what it is. But when someone at MIT wants to do organized research, and if a sponsor won't pay the full rate, the researcher is responsible for coming up with a difference, so 34% from non-restricted funds. And for all but the wealthiest researchers, that precludes their potential involvement at anything but the smallest of levels.
Okay, so some legal issues and some very clear cash issues. Wow. Okay, before we have a discussion about this, Andy, could I come to you? Yeah. Andy Cherry is Senior Scientific Officer at the Association of Commonwealth Universities. And Andy, what is your suggestion?
Well, my perspective really is that is quite different from the rest of the colleagues on the panel, apart from that of Michael, and that is the perspective of our developing country partners in the Association of Commonwealth Universities. But I suppose, by extension, the perspective of all developing countries and their aspiration, their very legitimate aspiration, to also benefit from the widening of access and the increased participation of the framework program. I suppose what I want to try and convey is that the need to overcome the inadvertent exclusion of developing countries based on their lack of capacity and lack of resources, which I think should not be reasons for exclusion, because it's not about lack of capacity, but lack of capability, but lack of capacity and lack of resources. I mean, these countries should not be viewed as having nothing to contribute. There's an enormous amount of contributions that can be made to the framework program by developing countries in the context, for example, of partnerships around the SDGs.
So an example you can think of?
Well, let me carry on with the point.
Okay,
Let's see if I can come up with some examples a bit later on. But so the interest that we have as the ACU, I suppose, is framed within the context of this sort of the enormous north-south dynamic which continues to persist and which is populated by a whole range of different examples, which I can give you one or two. So you have a capacity imbalance that really limits access. And as I say, I don't want that to be overlooked when we're thinking about international cooperation being just the preserve of developed and industrialized countries. I spent the last 10 years or so coordinating a network of African and European national programs to collectively promote international cooperation between the African continent and the European continent. And what I've seen in those 10 years is that while many African countries, all African countries if you like, have enormous aspiration to participate fully in programs like, highly prestigious programs like the Framework Programme, those aspirations really are thwarted by their lack of capacity and lack of access to resources, by unfavourable conditions domestically, the framework conditions in which they conduct science. And what this does is lead to an enormous disempowerment when they participate in programs. So inadvertently, we're excluding a huge proportion of the global talent pool. I mean, the point I want to make, I think, is that just because a country lacks capacity does not mean that it doesn't have talent. There's plenty of talent out there, and if the framework program is essentially about talent and exploiting talent for excellence, then we're doing ourselves, I think, an injustice by not doing a little bit more to really ensure that we can empower those who don't have the capacity, yes, the capacity and the resources. I mean, one very simple example.
Are you suggesting that these countries should then be eligible to be associated in some way?
Well,
would you
I
go
mean,
that
the point.
far?
I'm not saying that these countries are not associated. I mean, many countries in Africa, if not just about all, are able to participate fully and benefit fully from. But that's the point. Is that they lack the capacity to participate fully because of insufficient capacity. They don't have enough scientists. The scientists themselves don't have the resources domestically to contribute their ideas. There's a lack of empowerment, I suppose, is what I'm saying. I mean, a very simple example, quite topical, I suppose, is around open access and the requirement these days to publish much more in open access journals. But the cost of an APC is about 2,000 quid, which is half an annual salary in Nigeria. Which, I mean, whilst the framework program might pay for a certain number of publications to be put in open access journals, when the cost is so high, it becomes a barrier to participation. Just an example. Another example is the nature of innovation. Innovation, of course, in terms of the framework program, is all about the Western model, essentially. But innovation in Africa is all about the informal sector. There's an enormous amount of innovation that goes on there. But it's excluded, essentially, from consideration in a framework program project. The solutions, well, I mean, there's no one magic bullet, as a lot of people have said here. I mean, there's nothing that you can put your finger on. But I think what I'm certainly not saying is to compromise on excellence, because that would take away the rationale for the aspiration of participation. It's about spreading it, of course, but what we need to, I think, try to be imaginative about is a pact between the European Union and its programs and the member states and their institutions to strive for greater coordination, to build the capacity of those countries and their institutions who have the excellence, but perhaps not the means, and in a sense to loosen some of the criteria around participation.
Is that not an issue for development aid rather than Horizon Europe?
I mean, that's exactly the point. I mean, there's been a persistent conversation, of course, and everybody's very familiar with it, around the policy coherence. I mean, that's one that goes on in Europe, but I think that needs to be extended to European member states and their institutions too, because we all, as institutions and member states, have our own development cooperation instruments which are, driven by national interests. But at the same time, we need to think perhaps about coordinating more effectively to make sure that our international partners have their capacity built to participate in these excellent programs, which then mobilizes the talent that they have for the benefit of these excellent programs. You see what I'm trying to get at? So I'm looking for, I suppose, a closer pact between the European Union and its programs and the member states and their programs to more concertedly drive up the standard across the world and not just in Europe and developed countries, because we're missing out on a significant proportion of the global pool of talent.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
The very concrete example I really wanted to give you was that there's something called the Research Fairness Initiative. Google it for those who, don't have time to look into it now, but essentially it's a way of codifying the fairness of a collaborative partnership. It simply says that if any individual, any institution, any country subscribes to the values of the Research Finance Initiative, it's a mechanism for codifying that you treat your partners across a whole range of indicators in a fair manner. Simply by building this into, for example, framework program agreements, we could do a great deal to assure our developing country partners that the way they're treated in a program is going to be far more consistent than it is today.
Okay, all right, okay. So I did warn you that the association part of it might be rather slim, because in our preparations for this, I wasn't hearing many of the panelists who were wanting to really stick their necks far out on this issue. But just before we go on, and by the way, we will stop at 10 past, and then there's 15 minutes for lunch. Okay, but if you're dying for lunch right now, you may go. Okay, so that's for the web audience too. But on the issue of association, that's that's a second country, as it were. So, any suggestions for how that should change? Marilyn, you did have some ideas on this.
Well, it's just that following the current discussion and knowing about the context right now, it's for sure that Switzerland would like at least to plea for keeping association agreement attractive for international partners. Might that be the one that we're already associated or new ones? And in that sense, so to make sure that the participation will also be attractive. Because
you mean attractive to everybody who's associated, or do you mean more attractive to Switzerland and Norway and other old associates?
The thing, I think, in terms of fair treatment, I think that is something that is needed to be built and to continue, because that could be also the problem. Then we hear right now that. It might be a restriction for certain topics because of EU protectionism that is also normal to exist. But things that were till now always accepted, like IPR rules or voting right in the external structure that are built around Horizon 2020, where it was always possible to have a role according to the benefits that we could also bring as associated country to the framework program. For me, right now, I see signals of rather a tendency to close the systems because of the fear that perhaps Brexit also creates. And I would, in that sense, just plea for fair treatment and equal treatment to manage to attract still the best talents within the framework program in the future.
I see. Okay, so basically what you're saying is don't weaken the association deal in order to make room for the UK, for instance.
Okay, that was more to make sure that the deal is good on both sides, that we have a win-win situation, because what we should preserve is the collaboration.
Okay, you said it more diplomatically. Research. Okay, all right. Okay, Andy, you are British. Any comment on this?
I had to steer very carefully. I mean, as I say, one hat I work for the ACU, the other hat I'm seconded to the UK Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which is the department leading on the science chapter of of Brexit, EU exit, as I should say, as we call it. From the ACU perspective, of course, we're very interested in the outcome, and we'll support our UK members. That's the standard line. From the government's line, I'm really not supposed to say anything at all. I have to say, I mean, clearly, everybody knows what the UK is interested in. We want a strong relationship. We are very supportive of maintaining that relationship. We're encouraged by the degree of support that we have from all other member states to maintain our relationship. But I don't think I can be drawn any further than that.
Okay.
Commissioner
Oettinger,
the discussions have started formally a couple of weeks ago. On Thursday, there is the second phase of the discussion, and we will see, the UK will see what the European Commission's proposal is in response to our initial offer, sort of general offer of intent.
Okay, all right. Michael, just one question for you before I call on Senior, and that is, can you? There was a recommendation from a group of VIPs here, chaired by Pascal Lamy, the former WTO head, that there be more forms of association, and they even mentioned the U.S. Mm-hmm. Did you ever see that?
With the U.S. government right now? I mean, I'll be diplomatic, of course. We do have an implementing arrangement in place for non-funded collaborations. The trick there, of course, is that if you're wealthy enough to not need the money, perhaps your collaboration is easier to resolve. Many of our researchers are looking for funding because it's basically the way MIT operates, that our researchers have to go out and get the money to sustain their students, their lab, their own staffing. If there is an association involving the U.S., I would see it along the lines of reciprocity. So MIT has a single audit for all U.S. federal research. So the U.S. government has an auditor who basically lives at MIT, and that audit and its findings that MIT is okay enable us to not be audited on every single project. And many foundations, many sponsors that aren't the U.S. government accept the findings of our U.S. single auditor. That's an area where potentially the Commission could agree to accept a U.S. audit. An American could agree to accept a foreign audit. We could have agreements, reciprocity on things like indirect rates, where right now the U.S. only pays 10%, which is a de minimis rate below what Horizon pays. So there's opportunities there.
Well, okay. Well, we can dream. But Senia, a final word from you on this?
Brief, in order not to hold you up from lunch. Now, just a couple of points. First, on the ones which were raised by the, on the US participation. First, what I'd like to mention that despite, the difficulties that some of the participants have seen, US remains by far the third country in participation in Horizon 2020. There have been limited number of special cases with US entities which have had the problems with grant agreements in 2017, but now my colleagues are claiming that really they have been decreasing since the start of Horizon 2020, meaning that the rules have already simplified that participation. But as said also before, the Commission is the guardian of the treaties, and clearly this is the legal framework of the EU that we have to keep in mind. However, within this legal framework already also the simplification has taken place in Horizon 2020, and this will be further developed. Now, when it comes to the participation of the participants from developing countries, clearly, which I also mentioned at the beginning, the attention is really to create more synergies with other policies and with other programs. I mentioned the external, but also the development policies. Clearly, what we need to focus, put more attention is that via our development cooperation, we actually help these countries and also, say African countries, to develop their structures so that they will be stronger partners, that really the excellent scientists will have an easier way also to become a participant. But as said, Horizon Europe will continue to be open to the world, so all excellent scientists will find their way either by means of direct grants based on excellence, via the means of partnership in various forms, via the flagship initiatives, which really bring together then the participants from different countries and different institutions with the same objective, coping with the challenges that we have ahead of us globally. So all of that will continue and will be made easier and also more focused on impact, which will be across the whole Horizon Europe program, also concerning our cooperation with third countries. So with that, I'd like to conclude on my behalf, and many thanks for all also the recommendations, ideas coming from the panel and also coming from the floor. So thanks a lot on my behalf.
Thank you. And thank you to the panel for participating in this idea session. As I said, we will publish an account of this. That fellow right there is Florin, is the one you want to talk to if you want to get your own ideas into this. So thank you very much, and let's have lunch.